This is the third in the trilogy of videos about Wi-Fi on the Canon XA20, the XA25 and the HF-G30. And in this video we're going to look at FTP upload, that is sending your files back from the camcorder to an FTP server while you're out in the field, perhaps news gathering for some news channel or news website or whatever. Now the way Canon has implemented this is not brilliant. There are numerous practical problems and I will come to those as we go through the video, so bear with me. The first thing we need to do is tell the camera the FTP address of the server that we want to send our files back to. So we go into menu, we've switched the camera by the way to playback mode, that's media mode as it's labelled on this one. And we go into the menu obviously, and then the Wi-Fi, and down at the bottom here FTP server settings, and it brings up a screen asking for the FTP server address, the username and password and so on and so forth. Yours probably won't look like this. I've actually typed server address and username in just to sort of show what it is we're going to type in. I think it's just blank when you first fire up the camcorder. So we press the edit button here, which is not going to let me do. Come along, edit, there we go. And the first thing it wants is the server address. So I will just delete where I've typed server address and type in a real server. I've set up a temporary account for the purposes of this demo, and it's on my Tubeshooter website. So click OK. Port 21 is absolutely normal, so we'll leave that. So press the next button, and it wants to know your username. Now, if you aren't technical and don't know anything about FTP and so on and so forth, whoever operates your company's FTP server will have all this info, so just get it off them and type it into all the appropriate boxes here. So again, I'll just delete username, and I created a username specially for this. Click OK. The password then. So that's OK. Click on next. The destination folder, where do you want the camera to put the video files once it has logged into your FTP server? Be aware that the camera doesn't actually obey your instructions. If you leave this at /, which is the root directory, or even if you give it a directory name, it doesn't actually put the files there. It puts them into a dated subdirectory of whichever folder you specify. Anyway, that's one minor niggle. Click on OK, and we have now set up the FTP server. Minor niggle number 2 is you can only configure one FTP site, and if you are a freelance video journalist toting this camera around, you are inevitably going to want to send files back to more than one organization and therefore more than one FTP server, and you really don't want to have to be entering all that username, password and so on and so forth out in the field. What you need here is an ability to define 1, 2, I don't know, 5 different FTP servers which you can then pick from when you want to send files back. It's not impossible, because if we actually look just up here at the access point connection, you can have 4 different access points pre-configured, but for some reason you can only ever have one FTP server. So that is an annoyance which Canon could really do with fixing. Now let us assume you've gone out into the field, you're on the scene of the breaking news story, the building is on fire or whatever, and you've captured some footage. Now you need to send some of those files back. The first thing you're going to need, of course, is some Wi-Fi, because in order to transmit anything from the camcorder, you're going to need an internet connection. So there are a couple of ways of doing this. If you have a smartphone like this, an iPhone, you can actually turn the iPhone into a Wi-Fi hotspot and use its 3G signal to transmit the files back. So the Canon camcorder talks over Wi-Fi to the phone, and the phone talks over 3 or 4G over the internet to transmit the files back. So what I'm going to briefly do, just out of shot here, is enable a Wi-Fi hotspot on my phone. So let's go into access point connections. In other words, how do you want to connect to the internet over Wi-Fi? And you can see I have actually pre-configured some of these already, but let's go to the fourth one, the not configured one, and click the little spanner icon. And there are various ways you can get a connection between the camcorder and whatever Wi-Fi you happen to be in. You may be in a cafe which offers free Wi-Fi. You may be using your phone, as I am doing here, to give you the Wi-Fi. And there are various different ways. So what I'm going to do is do search for access points, and the camcorder is now looking to pick up any local Wi-Fi signals that it might be able to use. Now I've actually configured two for the purposes of this test. The first one you can see there, Canon XA20 DHCP Wi-Fi, is my home Wi-Fi network. But if we go down one, we should see Canon XA20 test. That's actually my iPhone. Here is the iPhone being a Wi-Fi hotspot, and it's called Canon XA20 test just for the purposes of this. So we'll select that one and go OK. It wants an encryption key, which is the password of my iPhone. So bear with me while I type that in. So I've typed in the password on my iPhone that will give me that connection. Hit OK. Hit OK again. Configuration complete. OK. And we have now configured that access point connection. And here we are in our normal media playback screen. There are some files we're currently looking at, as you can see, card A and the AVC HD files. If we wanted to look at card B, we could click there, or card A there, and we could look at its MP4 movies. It reads the card, there's only the one MP4. So we'll just nip back into AVC HD. And you can really see now all those fingerprints smudging the screen. It's making a horrific mess of it. But let me take you back now to the scenario I initially pitched. We're out on a story, some breaking news. We've shot some footage, here it is, of some trees in the garden, and we want to send them back via FTP. So you click Menu, Wi-Fi, and FTP transfer at the bottom here. And this is where Canon have really cocked up the implementation, because at this point you cannot select individually which files you want to send back over FTP. You can only select which card, and then either all files on the card or all new files, which is any file you haven't already sent back over FTP. And by and large, in many situations, those things will both be the same, because you may not make a habit of sending files back over FTP. And certainly when I go out on news stories, I clear my cards at the start of a new session. So everything that's recorded will be new files and all files. Those two things will be the same. And you don't want to send back all files, because sending back files over Wi-Fi is going to be slow. Even if you've got a good Wi-Fi signal, you need to be able, Canon, to select the files to send back individually. But there is a little way round this, but it's not a good way round it. And that is, if you record all your footage on card A and keep card B blank, you can then instead copy the files by going into, I think it's function, and copy the files you want to send from card A to card B, and then just say send all files on card B. So having copied just the files you want to send back over FTP to an otherwise blank card, card B, you can now go into the FTP settings and send just those files back. So Wi-Fi, FTP transfer, card B, all the files being just the ones you've copied, OK. And it's now going to make a Wi-Fi connection to whatever your preferred access point was that we selected earlier. Once it's made that Wi-Fi connection, it will do an FTP connection using the FTP server details we typed in earlier, and then it will start to upload the files over FTP. And the length of time that takes, of course, is entirely dependent on what kind of speed you get out of your Wi-Fi network. So there you can see it's made the connection to the FTP Tubeshooter account. It starts to say transferring files, and this is another weird thing about the Canon. You'd think this progress bar would move along here as it's transmitting. It doesn't. I don't know if it moves along if you're transmitting multiple files, but if you're transmitting a single file, it goes from 0 to 100% when it's done it, which is not reassuring at all, because you're now looking at this screen thinking, well, are you actually sending anything or not? And you have no way of knowing until it comes to the end of it and the bar moves along and it says done. Now the file I decided to transfer was shot at 24 megabits, so a high bit rate. It was only about 10 seconds long, that file, but even so, that's a lot of bits to send over a Wi-Fi connection. And after waiting a little while, process completed successfully. Your files have now been sent back over the magic of Wi-Fi to an FTP server somewhere in the ether. And that is how you send files from an XA20. So lots of things Canon could do to make this better, selecting the files individually to send instead of sending all files, and also being able to copy the files you've shot down to a lower format in AVC HD would be quite handy as well. Hope that was useful. If it was, please click the like button and perhaps subscribe to the channel. Cheers now, bye-bye. Now I'll also just show you how you would configure a Wi-Fi network where it doesn't appear under the search for access points, and you have to do it manually and type in all the details by hand. So you can see here, you press manual setup. The SSID is the name of the Wi-Fi network, as it were. And again, I've configured one for the purposes of this demo, and this is actually a broadband router that is in the same room that I'm filming this in. So we'll just type the name in. And that's the name of the network, Canon XA20 DHCP Wi-Fi. Okay. And next, the encryption method, how the signals are being scrambled. WPA2 PSK, and the encryption key I will just type in. This is the password that you need to get into that particular router. So the password is now typed in. Okay, press next, and let us assume again, although it is a DHCP router, let us assume that it's not, and you're going to have to type it in, so manually, and you have to give it an IP address, which will be, this is really long-winded. Okay, now obviously, depending on what network you connect to, that number may or may not work. I just happen to know on this particular router we're connecting to that 192.168.0.15 should be okay, touch wood. Subnet mask, this is very tedious, but it's 255.255.255.0. Again, these are all details that your networking guru should have for you. In an ideal world, you'd just be able to connect to the FTP the way we did it through the iPhone. Even on a local network, you should probably be able to do that. This is just if you need to type everything in longhand, as it were. So next, the default gateway, 192 again, so short pause while I type in all the details. 192.168.0.1 is the default gateway. That's fairly standard for local networks. Next, primary DNS server. This is all very tedious, as you can see, but if you have to do it, it's good to see that you can do it this way. So I've given it a primary DNS. We'll skip the secondary and hope it doesn't mind. Configuration completed. Okay. So after long last, we've configured an access point that way.